Back again, still with Chapter 5 and continuing our discussion. As I pointed out, there are some criticisms with the biological approach and model, and models, I should say. And one of the things I would point out that there seems to be some research emerging, for example, that with certain types of violent offenders or sex offenders, there may be some brain-based differences in brain structure, for example. Okay, if we find that to be the case, so what? What do we do? Do we say, well, it's brain-based? Okay. Do we excuse it? Do we punish the person? Do we use medications? Do we do some type of psychosurgery? What do we do? So this opens up a whole box of moral dilemmas in that sense that we have to address, and a lot of ethical concerns in that regard. Let me give you an example. There's a case study of an individual who did not commit any criminal activities. All of a sudden in his adulthood, he started to engage in sexually offensive behavior. He was evaluated, and they conducted MRI scans of his brain and found that he had a brain tumor. They believe that this may be causing, they said, his sexual acting out. He underwent surgery to remove the brain tumor, and once the brain tumor was removed, he went back to his non-sexually abusive self. And for several years, he did not engage in any sexually inappropriate behavior. Then all of a sudden, he started to engage, and they did brain scans again, found the tumor grew back. So they removed the tumor, stop again. So how do we make sense of that situation? Do we brain scan anyone who has committed some type of offense? I guess what I would say is we're not clear, I think, as a society, how to proceed with the research that we have. In other words, the laws and the technology and the research findings are all out of whack. They're not consistent, and we have not adequately, in my opinion, dealt with the moral ethical issues related to brain-based biological studies as related to criminal justice and the legal system and treatment versus punishment. The same thing can be said if someone engages in certain behaviors because of exposure to particular chemicals or exposure to particular stressful situations that lead to changes in the brain. So there's still a lot that we need to address there. Moving on, your author discusses psychodynamic theory, really the theory based on the psychoanalytic model of Sigmund Freud, and then moving into some of the modern day aspects of that approach. But Freud believed that there were three basic personality components: the id, the ego, the superego. The id are those impulses, and he said primarily they're sexual and aggressive impulses, thanatos and eros, sex and death, and that in order to deal with a lot of these, we have to have another personality component. Actually, we have two. We have the ego, and then we have the superego. The superego really would be the societal constraints and morals, values, laws, etc. And the ego would be the mediator. So, for example, if someone has too much id and not enough ego, they may act out aggressively or sexually in inappropriate ways or illegal ways. But if someone has too much superego, then they may feel guilty about the slightest sexual or violent thoughts, or if they engage in basically inane behavior, they may be very upset and feel guilty about certain features. If we try to simplify all this, I go into the refrigerator, I see brownies and chocolate chip brownies with, chocolate icing and some whipped cream and some butterscotch chips. And I'm saying, and this is something, for example, that my wife has is bringing to work that we made and together, and we put it in the refrigerator, and my wife said, "Don't touch those brownies, they're for work." Well, my wife then steps out, and I open up the refrigerator door. It is saying, "Okay, you can probably, since it's out of the pan and they're all cut up, I can take one." Right? No one's gonna know. It's saying, "Take one, take one. It really looks good and everything." The superego saying that would be wrong. Your wife specifically told you not to eat those brownies. Do not take those brownies. That would be a breach of trust. That would be wrong to do. It wouldn't be fair to her coworkers to be lacking one brownie. And the ego's kind of saying, well, you're kind of hungry. It looks good. So the ego says, well, okay, leave those brownies alone, but let's go ahead and look in the freezer, and maybe we find some ice cream. And so I have some ice cream instead, kind of a compromise in that sense. Well, you can come up with your own examples and see. We also use a lot of Freudian terms, such as, and Freud said we have a lot of anxiety, and to deal with anxiety, we have defense mechanisms, and such ones as denial, projection, regression, and so forth. The regression one is kind of interesting. When someone gets a little anxious, they may go back into an earlier state. If you ever go to your high school reunion, or if you go to any high school reunion, I mean, all you need to do is go to someone's high school reunion, just get one of those patches. Hi, my name is, just write a name there. People won't recognize you, or people may, even if you didn't go there. But you go to your high school reunion, and all of a sudden you say, "Oh, these people kind of acting like they're younger." That they go back. That's regression, regressing in that sense. You see this sometimes in bars and nightclubs. When buddies get together, they regress. You know what I'm talking about if you've ever seen the scenario in that regard. The psychodynamic, the psychoanalytical, moving into psychodynamic term in that sense, begins to look at other features as well, looking at aggression and frustration and events in early childhood and how that affects later adult development. So really, I think we have a developmental perspective here with this psychoanalytic, psychodynamic. And your author also focuses on attachment theory and some of the problems that occur when there's failure of children or infants to attach to a parent or parental figure, and some of the problems that we see there. Certainly, we've used attachment theory in looking at problematic behaviors and relationships based on early child abuse and neglect. So there's some research in that area as well. And this wraps up this segment.